To preserve his life, this Jew lied that he was Persian. At that time, there happened to be an officer in the concentration camp who wanted to learn Persian, so he was brought before Klaus. Klaus, to verify his identity, asked him to speak a few words of his hometown language. He, having no idea about Persian, could only make up words on the spot. Luckily, Klaus also did not understand Persian. He casually uttered a string of syllables and attached poetic-like translations to them. This fluent Persian temporarily eased Klaus's suspicion, and Klaus then assigned him to relatively easy work in the back kitchen, where he worked in the kitchen during the day and taught Klaus Persian after work. However, Klaus also warned the Jew in advance that he hated deception the most. Once he found someone cheating, he would make their life worse than death. Hearing this, Gillis was frightened but ultimately survived. Initially, Gillis thought he only needed to respond verbally, but Klaus demanded that he teach at least 4 Persian words every day. Since Klaus knew nothing about the language, Gillis decided to create his own language system to fool him. However, this was not easy, because before teaching Klaus, he had to remember the words he casually invented, constantly creating new ones while ensuring he wouldn't forget them. While working in the back kitchen, Gillis could only use what was around him: chicken, duck, beef, lamb, pork, as well as butter, bread, and cutlery. All of these items were given new Persian names by him. Soon, he had his first Persian lesson in his life. During the class, Klaus openly stated his purpose for learning Persian. He planned to go to Tehran, the capital of Persia, after the war to run a restaurant. It turned out that Klaus had been helping in the kitchen since he was 12, and by 22, he had become the head chef, able to serve up to 150 guests each night, confident in managing a restaurant. He estimated that if he learned 4 Persian words a day, he could master over 1,000 in a year and over 2,000 in 2 years. He judged that the war would last at most 2 years. Regardless of who wins or loses, these vocabulary skills would be enough to open a restaurant. The first word they learned was bread. After that, one dared to teach, the other dared to learn. But before they even reached the height of interest, Gillis, the teacher, was already exhausted from coming up with ideas. He never thought that teaching could be such a mentally draining job. To pass as someone who knew Persian, Gillis kept practicing silently every night before bed, but he was caught on the spot by the dormitory supervisor. He had to make up an excuse of praying in Persian to barely get by. Since then, Gillis has been worried every day about inventing 4 new words. He thought that was enough to give him a headache, but even bigger trouble followed. Klaus actually found learning 4 words a day too easy, realizing he had seriously underestimated his own language learning ability. So he listed 40 German words at once, demanding Gillis translate all of them into Persian, and came to check a few hours later. Upon hearing these words, Gillis was instantly at a loss. Creating 40 words now might not be difficult, but remembering them one by one was as hard as climbing to the sky. This time, he felt doomed and believed the only way out was to escape from here. Unexpectedly, someone actually created an opportunity for him. It turned out that since Gillis became Klaus's language teacher, Klaus had noticed that his handwriting was very neat. Meanwhile, the female assistant Elsa, responsible for filing, had handwriting that was truly unbearable. So Klaus had Gillis take over Elsa's registration work. This made Elsa feel suddenly very down, but in front of Klaus, she dared not speak out and could only vent her anger on the Jewish prisoner in the kitchen. Simply because she thought his hands were not clean enough, she pressed her hand onto a hot iron plate. When Elsa's suitor Max learned of this, he immediately went to plead with Klaus for Elsa. He claimed to have grown up among the Jewish community and could tell at a glance whether someone was truly Jewish, insisting that Gillis was not a real Persian. This immediately angered Klaus, who scolded Max sternly on the spot. Klaus's reprimand filled Max with resentment. He was determined to eliminate Gillis from the camp. Of course, if he directly killed him, Klaus would not forgive them. After several discussions, the two came up with a plan. Subsequently, Max volunteered to escort Gillis outside the camp to dump the slops, pretending to enjoy the scenery along the way, allowing Gillis to escape. Since no one had ever escaped alive from the camp, he believed Gillis would surely die halfway. Gillis saw this as a gift from heaven and immediately ran into the woods. The forest was shrouded in fog, but a glimmer of life could still be felt. Just then, an old soldier suddenly called out to him. From this French veteran, Gillis learned that to the east was a minefield, to the west was a swamp, making walking escape extremely difficult, while if the Germans pursued, they could drive quickly. The veteran advised him to return the way he came. In the end, Gillis followed the veteran's advice and pushed his cart back to the camp. Seeing Gillis return safely after going out and coming back, Max and Elsa looked surprised. After Gillis returned, Klaus took him to his desk and assigned him to transcribe the list of Jewish prisoners. Klaus repeatedly emphasized that the format of the list was extremely strict. However, Gillis had no time to care about this. At this moment, his mind was filled with Persian words. Until the sunset and night fell, he still could not think of a single word. Just when he was at a loss, the notebook he was flipping through suddenly inspired Gillis, and a bold idea arose in his mind. So Gillis used parts of these Jewish names as roots to create 40 words before Klaus's inspection. Seeing the list Gillis transcribed, Klaus was greatly impressed. Neat and tidy handwriting. Gillis submitted 40 words as requested. However, Klaus did not stop there, but insisted on checking in person. Fortunately, the roster was right in front of him, and Gillis managed to pass by glancing at it. To deepen his memory, he called out these names daily during meals to reinforce his impression, combining his first impressions of each person to invent more new words based on these names. Klaus recited Gillis' invented language every day, filled with joy in learning. 6 months passed in the blink of an eye, and Klaus had learned over 600 Persian words. The matter spread quickly, almost throughout the entire camp, naturally attracting the commander's attention. He summoned Klaus to his office and questioned him face to face whether he intended to defect. Klaus was greatly surprised upon hearing this, immediately denying it, and explaining that his brother was in Tehran, and he was only trying to learn the local language early for post-war reunion. The commander was furious after hearing this, believing that while the war was not over, Klaus had already become lax and lazy. If all the troops were as dedicated to learning Persian as he was, Germany would have already moved its capital to Moscow. But now, there was an opportunity for Klaus to demonstrate his loyalty. In a few days, the army would organize a gathering, and Klaus was responsible for the food arrangements. On the day of the gathering, the atmosphere was lively, with singing and dancing non-stop, and everyone drinking freely. During the event, the diligent Klaus casually asked Gillis, "How do you say tree in Persian?" Noticing something was wrong, Gillis hurriedly explained, "It's a polysemous word." However, feeling deceived, Klaus was still furious and beat Gillis harshly. The watching officers' laughter grew louder, and the more Klaus kicked Gillis, the harder he hit. Fortunately, Klaus did not kill Gillis, but instead sent him to a more arduous quarry, under strict supervision by Max, who slowly tortured him. Sure enough, after a few days, Gillis, weak and frail, collapsed from exhaustion. On his deathbed, he kept reciting his self-created Persian. If Max had been the one guarding him that day, he would never have given him any chance. Fortunately, Max was on a date with Elsa that day, and he asked his comrade to take over the shift. This comrade had been thinking about the remaining 8 cans of meat. Originally, they brought Gillis to Klaus because Klaus had announced in the camp, "Whoever can find someone who speaks Persian will be rewarded with 10 cans of meat." But when they brought Gillis to Klaus, he was worried Gillis might be fake, so he only gave 2 cans and said the remaining 8 would be confirmed and awarded later. Seeing Gillis murmuring incomprehensible words, the comrade called Klaus over. Thinking only Klaus, who had studied Persian, could understand what Gillis was saying, that I didn't expect Klaus to really understand. Gillis was saying, "I want to go home to find my mother." Klaus thought that people often only speak their native language unconsciously. Could it be that he really misunderstood Gillis? He hurriedly ordered Gillis to be sent to the medical station. That comrade who saved Gillis not only took the remaining 8 cans of meat alone, but also received an extra bottle of fine wine. Under the strong will to survive, Gillis stubbornly managed to live. With the careful care of the doctor and Klaus, Gillis' body quickly recovered, but the trauma suffered mentally was hard to erase. As if everything could never return to the way it was to Tio apologize, Klaus gave Gillis his old cotton coat, and hoped he wouldn't refuse this gesture. From then on, Klaus officially regarded Gillis as his teacher. At this moment, Gillis also gradually became proactive. He taught Klaus in a teacher's tone. The word for tree and bread is the same in Persian. He would also actively seek conversations with Klaus, and, when Klaus didn't understand, would subtly remind him like a mentor. All this gradually brought the two closer without them realizing it. They communicated in their unique language, as if engaging in an encrypted dialogue. Klaus finally opened his heart. He lost his mother at the age of 3, his father was chronically disabled and bedridden, and the whole family relied on selling hot water to survive. They often struggled to even afford cabbage and potatoes, which made him vow never to go hungry when he grew up. This was also the reason he later learned cooking. These long-buried memories, like unopened buds, were now slowly told through Persian. If their statuses hadn't been opposed, perhaps they would have long been close friends. Later, Klaus said he would send Gillis to a farm the next day to hide for a few days. Gillis immediately realized that a group of Jewish compatriots was about to be executed. The next day, the prisoners were gathered, and Gillis was openly taken away from the camp and sent to the farm to avoid the purge that Klaus's obvious favoritism inevitably aroused suspicion. So Elsa took the opportunity to report to the commander, accusing Klaus of hiding a male lover and favoring prisoners. The commander came specifically to question him, but Klaus was unhurried and casually threw out his trump card. There have always been various rumors circulating in the military, such as some about you, Commander. It turned out that Elsa, who had been demoted earlier, had secretly had an affair with the commander to seek promotion, but after being with Max, she became arrogant and openly discussed the commander's size with Max unexpectedly. This was overheard by Max's ex-girlfriend at IN Revenge. The woman secretly reported to the commander at this point. Klaus only mentioned the part about the commander's size, the rumor that it could only be seen with a magnifying glass, and then stated that he believed. This was purely malicious slander. Upon hearing this, the commander could only agree reluctantly. They are all victims of slander. As for the source of the rumors, the commander had long known in his heart. A few days later, the commander used his authority to transfer Elsa to the front lines of the troops, while Max's ex-girlfriend took over her original position. Several days later, Klaus claimed that the prisoners in the concentration camp would be transferred to Buran. Gillis knew very well that this was not the case. What awaited them was either a gas chamber or a mass grave. Fortunately, Klaus extended a helping hand again. He arranged for Gillis to hide at a farm and planned to pick him up in a few days. The next day, Gillis left the concentration camp amid the call of German officers and gunfire. He hid on the farm, slept on a pile of straw at night, and ate raw potatoes when hungry, but ultimately survived. When Gillis returned to the concentration camp, Max stopped him, intending to take revenge on Elsa, and mockingly said he was a fake Persian cat with 7 lives, threatening to see how many bullets it would take to finish him off. However, Gillis' face remained unchanged as he walked straight past Max. Max finally dared not to shoot. He still valued his life and dared not offend Klaus. At this moment, the empty playground was filled with a numb atmosphere, as if Gillis' heart was equally silent and terrifying. The barracks were also deserted, and everyone there had once been like a word, contributing to Gillis' life. But now they were all on their way to Poland, turning into black smoke rising from crematorium chimneys, drifting toward an unreachable heaven. Later, Gillis picked up a cloth doll from the ground, tore off the name on it, and defined this name as Life. A few days later, the concentration camp sent another batch of new Jewish prisoners. Life in this concentration camp seemed to eternally cycle between arrival and disappearance. Gillis still returned to the kitchen to serve as an assistant, distribute food, ask for names, and invent Persian words, repeating the same work day after day, as if these days would never end. As the war drew to a close, Klaus' obsession with Persian deepened, and he often exclaimed, "There are such beautiful languages in the world." But what he didn't know was that it was only because his parents favored melodious words when naming their children that the Persian vocabulary he learned sounded so beautiful. One day, Klaus deliberately found Gillis and used the words he had learned to compose a poem. The wind blows the clouds eastward, toward the homeland of peace that the soul longs for. There he will find happiness, in that place where the clouds drift. After receiving Gillis' praise, Klaus brought him a generous meal to thank him, but Gillis wanted to take the food back to the dormitory to eat. Klaus immediately guessed that he planned to share it with others who were hungry, so he brought canned meat and bread for him to take back. Only then did Gillis feel at ease and start eating. After returning to the barracks at night, Gillis shared the food with the 2 brothers across the B80 that it turns out that the younger brother among the brothers is mute. Due to his lack of physical strength, he was accidentally injured in a fall during the day and was beaten by the German soldiers. The older brother tried to protect him, but was also beaten along with him. Gillis witnessed this scene. From that moment on, Gillis decided not to only focus on his own survival, but to do his best to help those whose lives were about to fade. And all he could give were these canned meats and bread. Gillis silently helped, deeply moving the older brother. That day, a new group of prisoners arrived at the concentration camp. When Max discovered that among them was a real Persian, he was overjoyed and immediately rushed into the kitchen, grabbing Gillis. Max was confident. As long as he confronted the two, Gillis, the deceiver who could manipulate hearts, would be exposed on the spot. However, when he took Gillis to find the Persian, he found that the person had already been killed. Max was furious and almost strangled Gillis, sternly questioning him about who was responsible. Unexpectedly, the older brother stepped forward, holding a bloodied weapon, and admitted that he had killed the Persian, because he knew the Persian would threaten Gillis's life, and only if Gillis was alive could his brother survive. Furious, Max immediately executed the brother. Thus, the brother exchanged his life to save Gillis and his younger brother, but he himself left this world forever. Meanwhile, the German soldiers received orders from their superiors. The prisoners would be transferred as planned the next day. Due to the railway being destroyed by Allied air raids, all prisoners and guards had to walk to the next train station. That evening, a drunken Klaus came looking for Gillis. After hearing the news of the Persian's death, he comforted Gillis, saying he need not be overly sad, and frankly admitted he was also very heartbroken. They could have had a joyful conversation like brothers, but it was cut short by this accident. He hoped Gillis would continue practicing Persian, but now everything was interrupted. Perhaps sadness triggered memories. Klaus recalled his estranged brother, whom he had lost contact with after going to Tehran years ago. Gillis did not respond after hearing this, only quietly said he was feeling a bit tired and also scared. Klaus, however, bet 20 canned meats that as long as Gillis served him, he could ensure his safety. Then Klaus added, "Tomorrow, Gillis will have to go back to the farm to hide for a few more days." During these days of close companionship, Gillis gradually realized that this German officer did not seem to be a demon. He was born into poverty, and was only drafted after being attracted by a military officer he encountered on the road. His greatest wish in life was to open a small restaurant. If it weren't for this misplaced era, and if their stances weren't opposed, perhaps they could have become close friends. But there are no what-ifs in this world, and tonight is probably the last time Gillis will see Klaus. All was silent. Everyone had already fallen into a dreamland, but Gillis silently put on the coat of that Jewish brother. He sacrificed his chance of survival for his brother, and himself was to set out at dawn the next day with his companions on the path that was always meant for him. Under the cold moonlight, Gillis' small figure was made even more gaunt by the oversized coat, yet his shadow was deep and majestic, cast on the ground. He stood quietly by the window, waiting for dawn to arrive. The next day, Gillis set out with the crowd to the station. A soldier glimpsed him among the crowd, thinking Klaus would no longer associate with Gillis, and teased Klaus during breakfast. Unexpectedly, Klaus was greatly alarmed upon hearing this, immediately excused himself, hurriedly caught up with the group, and soon found Gillis among the crowd. He pulled Gillis out of the line, and the soldier responsible for escorting hurriedly blocked him, saying he needed the commander's order to release him. Klaus, upon hearing this, directly raised his gun and pressed it against the soldier's forehead, sternly warning, "Is it his bullet or the commander's order that will come first?" The soldier, fearing for his life, dared not speak further. Throughout the process, Gillis remained calm. Learning that Gillis was going to die helping a mute, Klaus was deeply puzzled. How can Gillis risk his life for such an unknown person? Gillis retorted, "They all have names. Only Klaus has never cared. They are not bad, at least not murderers. Klaus may not have killed anyone himself, but managing the kitchen and letting the executioners eat their fill, isn't that also complicity?" Klaus was momentarily speechless. As a soldier, he could only follow orders, do his duty, and had no right to question or interfere with anything else. In this world where life and death are beyond one's control, Gillis was also about to find complete liberation. Due to the retreat of the German army, the U.S. military, with its powerful air force, approached France. Berlin headquarters ordered an immediate withdrawal, destroying all documents and executing all prisoners to eliminate future trouble. At this moment, Klaus knew the fate of the German Empire was sealed. Unwilling to resist to the end, he hurriedly changed into civilian clothes, packed his belongings, and prepared to escape. Before leaving, he still took Gillis with him, but this scene was seen by Max, who immediately reported it to the commander. However, everyone was on edge, and the commander paid no attention, instead reprimanding Max for neglecting his duty and sending him away. Soon, Klaus and Gillis circumvented the minefield and reached the woods to say farewell. Klaus informed him that there was a small airport 10 miles away, from where he would fly to Istanbul, then transfer to Tehran. As for why he took Gillis, perhaps out of gratitude for the careful guidance over the past 2 years, or out of pity, or perhaps the silent bond that had grown over time. But Klaus's explanation to Gillis was, he didn't want to lose the bet over 20 cans. Yet, this friendship was about to end at this moment. The two parted ways in the woods, perhaps never to meet again in this life. Soon after, Klaus arrived smoothly at Istanbul airport that time. Various countries were strictly checking on the fleeing German soldiers, so he filled in his hometown as Belgium on a forged passport. Klaus pretended not to understand German and instead responded fluently in Persian, confident that with 2 years of repeated practice, passing through customs would be a breeze. However, no one at the scene could understand his speech. Actually, he himself did not understand others' words, because what he knew well were not real Persian vocabulary, but what he called the nameless ones, the names of 2,840 Jewish victims. Coincidentally, the badge on the customs officers' hats bore the emblem of Persia. Confused, Klaus anxiously shouted loudly. And when the staff saw him acting suspiciously, they notified security personnel to arrest Klaus, realizing the danger. Klaus frantically tried to break through the checkpoint, but was quickly subdued. Meanwhile, Gillis was summoned to the post-war registration office. Since the German army had burned all prisoner records, the staff asked him, "How many people were held in the concentration camp? Can you still recall some of their names?" Surprisingly, Gillis not only knew that about 30,000 people were imprisoned in the camp, but also could accurately recite the surnames and names of 2,840 of them. The staff was greatly shocked, thinking this was almost impossible, but Gillis recited them one after another. As Gillis spoke, he quietly wiped tears. At that moment, his numb soul was finally freed that INA days. He seemed to return to the concentration camp, back to the days spent with those prisoners. They were no longer cold Persian words, but vibrant names, and more than that, they were scars etched deep in his heart, waves of indelible pain. They were neither consumed by fire nor drowned in the torrent of history, but transformed into wounds that could never be erased.